I understand you have a presentation for us. Mr. Christenson, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. We'll just bring it up here. Chair Roberson, Vice Chair Diaz, and members of the AB 394 Advisory Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm here today to provide a proposal to you of how I believe that we can improve the prospects for a very successful AB 394 implementation. Let me assure you that this is an incredibly daunting task. You heard Superintendent Skorkowski just now. A lot of things keep coming up. There's a lot of work to be done here. Ultimately, the only reason to go through all this is if we end up with dramatically improved student outcomes for our kids. I agree with you that the one very good way of improving those prospects is by moving the decision-making closer to the end user, that being the principals and teachers, the parents, and the students. It has to be done in a very fair and equitable way, and I really like the concept of the principals and teachers being able to address particular problems with their school population and yet still have the accountability related to those decisions. I guess if I were in your position, you know, we have a situation where the legislation has passed. This committee has now provided some vision and life to that legislation. What I want to know, if I were in your chair, is how do I get comfort that the implementation of 394 will be done well, especially now we're coming up to another legislative session and you have other things that you're working on. Based on my experience over the last 3 years, it's my opinion that the district needs assistance to complete the implementation of AB 394 by next fall. If for no other reason than their primary job is ensuring increased student achievement. Tom Skanke and I have a lot of experience working with organizations that need restructuring and reorganization in order to be more effective, and I think that's certainly the situation that we have here. Our goal is to work to be constructive and work shoulder to shoulder with the CCSD leadership in trying to bring this important legislation to fruition. Let me make something very clear up front. There are two pieces to the education delivery system. One is what goes on in the classroom. We're not talking about that at all. We're not educators. The other piece of the education delivery system is how do you make the second largest organization in the state in terms of number of employees after MGM become much more operationally efficient. That's where we want to focus. Our proposal includes really two main phases. The first is that we believe that we should create what we're calling the Community Implementation Council. It's be composed primarily of business community members to oversee this process. It would be much like board of directors in a public company. We certainly intend to leverage off the talent base of these individuals. The members of this council need to have the following characteristics. They need to be smart. They need to be critical thinkers. They need to be and demonstrate collaborative working with others. It needs to be a diverse group, ethnically, from a gender perspective, and also from a political ideology perspective. Each one of the individuals in this implementation council needs to have a specific skill set that will be important in the transition process here from being a centralized organization to an empowerment school district. And finally, each one of these council members need to have a specific direct contact with an important constituency in our community. The second step would be to hire a consultant to work on a day-to-day basis to essentially partner with CCSD leadership and be part of the transition team. Let's go back and talk about what it is that we're talking about with this, this council. I've described for you what we're looking for. If this proposal is acceptable to you, I would agree to chair the implementation council. I know some of you much better than others, but it might be helpful to get a little more in depth in terms of my qualifications to serve in this important role, and also to lay out for the record. As Senator Roberson mentioned, I'm a long-time Las Vegan. I've lived here roughly 44 years. When I started to work in Las Vegas, I worked for a company that's now known as Deloitte & Touche. Ultimately, I became the National Hospitality Industry Partner, and I also became the Nevada partner in charge of our audit practice. When I started with the firm, we had 16 professionals. By the time I left, we had over 70 professionals with an office that we opened up in Reno. The team that we put together allowed us to be the fastest growing office, Deloitte & Touche, in the country. I left Deloitte to become the Chief Financial Officer of Station Casinos. When I started at Station, the only property that we had in our portfolio was Palace Station, and it's about half the size that it is today. I helped take that company public, but our management team there, over the course of my tenure, was able to grow the company to 16 different properties that we have here in Las Vegas, along with management contracts in California, as well in Michigan, which came to fruition after I left. But in the last 5 years of my tenure at Station Casinos, that management team was able to generate the 10th best performance in terms of stock performance in the entire stock market. I have experience with several boards of directors. I was with Station Casinos. I was also on the board of directors of NV Energy at the time that we sold the company to Berkshire Hathaway. I was their audit committee chairman, but during the last 10 years of that company, prior to the time that it was sold to Berkshire Hathaway, that management team and the board working together was able to create the best performing utility in the utility sector, an incredible accomplishment. I have a long-standing relationship with the education community here in Southern Nevada. I was one of the original founders of the Nevada State College Foundation back in 2002. I am the longest serving chairman to date, with over 4 years that I served as chairman until I stepped down. My wife and I, Andy is in the audience today. We are incredible supporters of Nevada State College, and it's because of the students that are there. These are kids that the vast majority of them are the first in their families ever to serve or ever to go to college. It's a very diverse population there, and the vast majority of these students are also in some form of financial aid. These are kids that understand the importance of an education. If they can get a good education and develop a marketable skill and insert their passion, they have an opportunity to not only get to the middle class but beyond and live the American dream. It's what's not to love there. But my interaction with K through 12 education started a little over 3 years ago. In 2009, I was named as chairman of what was then known as the Nevada Development Authority. You will recall very well that that was a terrible time for economy in our community. I call it the blame game phase of our history here. People looked around and were pointing fingers at each other. Why aren't we more why do we have more diverse economy? Why don't we have a more sustainable economy? And the truth of the matter is that there was a lot of blame to go around. It was very obvious that as an organization, we had to fundamentally change the way that we think about economic development. We engaged in a national search and hired Tom Skanke to come in as our CEO. And we started thinking about how do we structure and reorganize this organization to dramatically affect what we're doing in terms of economic development. The function or mission of the Nevada Development Authority was very limited. It was to bring non-gaming related businesses to Southern Nevada. we started thinking much more broadly. It's the attraction, the expansion, retention, and diversification of businesses, which is a much more thoughtful way to approach it. We know that economic development is a team sport. We reached out to the municipalities and worked much more closely with them. We've reached out to trade organizations. We're doing the same thing, and individual businesses. And we've seen incredible success at the Global Alliance. I'm the longest-serving chairman there as well. They've named me chairman emeritus, but it occurred to me about three and a half years ago that someone else should take on that role. And I sat down with Tom, and we got to talking about what more the LVGEA should be doing, and we both agreed that we should be focused on education. The reason for that is that we knew from our research that economic development and education are inextricably linked. We also knew that 35% of the companies that aren't coming to Southern Nevada aren't coming because either our education system didn't meet their needs or we don't have the workforce. So we started thinking, how can we be more effective? So we developed what came to be known as the Las Vegas Education Council. We invited 7 business leaders, 7 education leaders, and asked them to sit down at a table and talk about what we could be doing together to improve the education system in our community. We asked everybody to check their egos at the door, check their ideology, political ideology at the door. What we found is that there were a number of things that we felt that we could do together. And we developed an education reform package, and this might all sound familiar to you. We knew from the research that the best predictor of good outcomes in a classroom is a highly qualified teacher. So we wanted to put more money towards that. We know that a child that doesn't read by the 3rd grade has a high probability of dropping out of school. So let's put some money towards Read by 3 programs. We know that every student in Nevada would benefit by full-day kindergarten, so let's put money towards that. We also know that there are populations that cost more to educate. Our English language learners, our free and reduced lunch, kids in poverty, special ed. We need to put more money towards those as well. We sent that reform package to the governor. I don't know what he did with it. All I know is that at the end of the day, every one of those reforms was included in the education reform package that you all voted on. We then went out and talked to the business community to build support for this, not only for the reforms that we felt were so important, but also to raise the money for them. We were very instrumental in getting the over 40 businesses and organizations and individuals that were stood on the steps of the Capitol building and asked you all to pass that legislation, both the reform as well as the revenues required to do it. The thread that binds all these experiences is that when you get people working together, tearing down the silos with a common goal, there's some great things that can happen. That's what needs to happen here with AB 394. I'm also currently the Vice Chair of the Education Spending and Government Efficiency Commission, as well as I co-chair with Superintendent Skorkowski, his Executive Advisory Committee, and I'll talk with you more about that in a minute. Let's get back to this implementation console that we think we need. Again, reviewing the requirements. They need to be smart. They need to be critical thinkers. They need to be collaborative. It needs to be a diverse group. We need to have folks who have a particular skill set that will be helpful in the transition, and they need to have a direct link to important constituencies. The folks that we would recommend to you to put on this console, Brett Husson, who needs no introduction if you do anything around education in our community. He's Executive Director of Nevada Succeeds. Perhaps more importantly, he has 3 kids in the Clark County School District. Ken Evans is President and CEO of the Urban Chamber of Commerce here. He's also a retired Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force. I got to know Ken during the lobbying phase in the last legislative session and came to have a great deal of respect for him. Nora Luna is the Director of Diversity and Education at Nate Allison Hospice. She's also a member of the State Board of Public Charter Schools. Personally, I'm agnostic. I don't care whether a child gets a good education or a quality education from the district or a charter school or a private school. They just need a quality education. The other thing that Nora brings to the table is she's highly respected in the Hispanic community. A relatively new face to the education-business relationship is a gentleman named Ryan Woodward. Ryan is the area manager for J.P. Morgan Chase. In my mind, it's always good to have a banker on a committee like this because they're critical thinkers. In addition, Ryan is a member of the board of directors of the Las Vegas Metro Chamber. It's going to be very important that we not only build support in the business community, but also build momentum. The Metro Chamber can be very helpful in that area. We also felt it was important to bring a millennial on the board. I think as a community, we should be starting to think about building leadership for the future. We were looking for a young, very smart, critically thinking CPA, and we found one in Vernice Flores. When we sat down and talked to her partner, she's a CPA at Fair Anderson Langerman. We sat down with Kurt Anderson and told him about what we wanted to do. Kurt very generously said that what his firm would do is essentially treat Vernice's appointment to this council as though it were a client engagement. He's going to assign specific managers and partners to work with her to ensure her success on this council. Not only that, but he has agreed to provide whatever services his firm can to the implementation council in kind. An incredibly generous offer. Another person that needs no introduction is Vicki Courtney. She's president of the Teachers Association. It's been my privilege to work with her over the last 3 years on many different items, and I found her to be a very trusted partner. Felicia Ortiz is a board member of the State Board of Education. There may be instances where we need help in that liaison with the state board. More importantly, actually, from my perspective, is she's president of a company called Project Management Solutions. She is an IT consultant, and she consults to major businesses. You heard Superintendent Skorkowski talk about some of the challenges with the computer system. They are real. I've experienced them firsthand. Finally, we have asked Erin Craner to be on this implementation council as well. Obviously, she's a board of trustees with the Clark County School District. We think having them involved in this process is very important, and having that connection. But recognize, and I think it's very fair to say that they've had some reservations about this process, but we think bringing them in the tent makes some sense. The way we've described the ask for all these individuals, it'll probably be about 10 hours a month. Roughly half of that time would be in meetings. As we've talked with each one of these people, they enthusiastically said, yes, we'd like to be part of it. The next step then is to who would actually do all the day-to-day work in helping the Clark County School District leadership. And for that, our recommendation is that you would engage Tom Skanke. There's a number of reasons why I think Tom is an ideal candidate for this particular assignment. First of all, Tom has a track record of working on reorganizations and restructurings. We just did it together at the LVGEAs, but he's done it with other organizations over the course of his 35-year career. Second, he knows all the issues, not only through the Education Council, but he's provided services and advice not only to the school district, but other folks that surround the school district as well. He certainly knows all the players. There's not going to be a learning curve here. We're not going to have to train somebody up on what some of the challenges are. In addition, Tom, through his advisory practice, knows a lot of people who can be very helpful technically to the extent that we need those people in this assignment. So what would we be doing? The very first thing is that we need to start an examination or review of the organization's policies, practices, and procedures. A little over a year ago, I was asked to be a guest lecturer at UNLV, talking about how businesses and the education system can work together. I was invited with Dr. Eva White, who's in the audience today, and I gave her some examples. The concept of return on investment, establishing metrics, defining success, establishing budgets, goals, accountability, change in changing circumstances, what are centralized versus decentralized functions. All these are things that are going to be important for this transition to work. We would be prepared to start immediately. Some of the things that we would work on over the next 80 days is to work with the superintendent and his team in identifying the 80% of the operating budget that should be transferred to at the local school level. We take a look at the organizational structure to make sure that it meets up with the requirements of AB 394. I would review and assist in the process of identifying the school associate superintendents. We'd look at how the weighted funding formula would work with respect to the upcoming budgets, work with them on the formation of these school-based organization teams. And finally, one of the things I think is most important in this process is developing a communication plan, both internal as well as external. We need to tell people of when there are successes, but not gild the lily. By the same token, when there are challenges, we need to define what those challenges are and what we're going to be doing about them. By January 15th, there's a number of things that need to happen. The individuals for the school-based organizational teams need to be in place. We need to work on the training aspect of those, helping those organizational teams. We just need to start looking at the next year's budget and how the weighted funding formula will impact that. We need to define some specific performance metrics for success. Oversee and help in whatever way that we can to make sure that both of the school associate superintendents are hired, as well as anyone in the cabinet that needs to be hired. And we'll continue with the communications and outreach. In terms of the superintendent's cabinet, one of the things that I'm sure that we're going to be recommending very early on is we need a chief operating officer. This is a major business, and we should have someone responsible for the operational function of that business. And of course, the chief financial officer position is still open. One of the good things about this whole process is that there's a lot of work that has been done. Mentioned the superintendent's executive advisory group before. We started together about 2 years ago and broke up into 3 subgroups. Brent Husson and other senior leaders from the Clark County School District have created a model that they call their return on investment model, such that they took over all the schools, over 300 schools in the district, and fully weighted them for all the different costs associated with the school, and then started looking at what the outcomes were. So we now have the ability to see which schools have relatively lower cost but relatively higher outcomes, and just the opposite. So we can compare schools. This will be an incredible management tool. We do need to do some tweaking to it, but through this AB 394 process, I think it would be very helpful. I actually co-chaired with a number of school leaders the program evaluation committee. If you'd gone into the school district a couple years ago, you would have found page after page after page of programs, but nobody knew whether those programs really worked or not. What our committee has done is give them a way to evaluate programs relative to outcomes, as well as develop a process to both onboard as well as off-board programs. This advisory group has been made up of a number of business and other community leaders, and I think it's been helpful, but we could put this on turbo drive, I think. I am also currently the vice chair of the SAGE Commission. We have one more meeting in November to consider various recommendations. We'll be looking at our report in December and providing that report then to the governor, the Legislative Council Bureau, and the State Board of Education sometime in January. There's a lot of other things that are being done out there that all need to be coordinated. For example, over a year ago, the Clark County Education Association started their Culture and Climate Committee. We have a real need in terms of the number of teachers in our community. One way to reduce that need is to retain great teachers. The purpose of this committee is to provide a culture and climate that will do that. Nevada Succeeds, after the last legislative session, asked the question, what's next? And for the last year, they've been looking at recommendations for the district to improve operations and improve district effectiveness. This organization is being chaired by Lieutenant Governor Hutchison, as well as former Secretary of State Ross Miller. It's intended to be a bipartisan organization. The CCEA has stepped up and is going to provide $2 million for leadership training, an incredible opportunity there. The Public Education Foundation is willing to step up and help train as well. But let me give you a perfect example of some of the challenges we have. In terms of leadership training, the CCEA has leadership training. The Public Education Foundation wants leadership training, and the district itself has leadership training. But nobody's overseeing providing a strategic plan to make sure that we're effective with the resources that we have. This is a place where I think an organization like TSC Group 2 could be very helpful to you. There's also a number of nonprofit organizations that have some great ideas. Hope for Nevada, Communities in School, Teach for America, Nevada PEP. There's nowhere now to get a lot of these great ideas into the organization because they keep bumping up against this massive organization. I think one of the things that this Implementation Council can do is be a repository for great ideas. And we can maybe help sort out ones that can be effective and be particularly helpful. This is intended to be a one-year assignment. By the time we get to October 31st of next year, our goal is that all the necessary policies and organizations will be in place working with the Clark County School District leadership. The organization teams need to be in place. The weighted funding formula needs to be in place according to the regulation. We want a robust communications plan. And finally, I think maybe most importantly, once this process is done, once this transition team has left, we need to have a sustainable organization. It doesn't do any good for us to come in, help, then leave, and then it not be part of the culture. In conclusion, there's a couple things that I'd like to say. First of all, I don't have a dog in this fight. I have been very engaged with the education issues. I put a lot of time in it. I've accepted no compensation. I'm not running for office. The only thing that I'm trying to do here is, based on the observations that I've had over the last 3 years, I really believe that there's a need for a group to come in and help implement AB 394. I'm available to respond to questions.